Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. Dan is away on military leave right now, so we're going to bring back some of our previous shows that didn't make it to the podcast. We hope that you enjoy them. As always, we welcome your feedback. Please share your thoughts and ideas at https://bit.ly/extension calling evaluation. That's https://bit.ly/extension calling evaluation, or rank us on your podcast app. If you'd like a written transcript of the show, please email me at Karen, Karen, .cox, COX, mail.wvu.edu, or call 304-234-3673. Thanks again for listening.
Let's go ahead and kind of recap some of the nutrients we have been talking about in soil testing. Remember, there's a great time for soil testing, but there's never a bad time for soil testing, right? So we have we've gone through nitrogen. We always talked about how nitrogen is one of those nutrients that need to be applied when the crop is actively growing. So we did talk about that. We talked about nitrogen leaching. We've talked about liming quite a bit, and to include liming, we've also talked about calcium and magnesium. Well, let's talk about let's say we got the pH right. It's a little early to apply the nitrogen. We'll talk about plants or grasses maturing sometimes if you put it too early in the season. But right now, let's talk about another nutrient. Let's say you do a soil test and your potassium, which is represented by the letter K a lot of times in your soil test, is low. Let's talk about what potassium does for the plant. Potassium, much like magnesium, is one of those metal cofactors that do reactions in the actual plant. Potassium deficiencies, typically when you see your plants, they're going to be low in the plants are going to be a little bit dwarfed. They're going to be stressed out. They're not going to be able to do those reactions that they normally could, especially in sandy soils. That's a place where you don't have a lot of potassium a lot of times. But usually, when we talk about clay soils that have a very high cation exchange capacity are able to hold those cations like potassium in place. But you got to be careful with potassium. Potassium is one of those luxury nutrients that plant can just suck up. If potassium ratios are if the magnesium to potassium ratios are less than 2-to-1, so if you have less than twice the amount of magnesium as you do potassium, what can happen is that plant can overwhelm itself with potassium, and then that grass blade, or let's just go with that grass blade for now. That plant or grass blade is going to be deficient in magnesium, not because it's there, but because the balance is off. Really important to look at the ratios when you're looking at recommendations, not just the whole numbers themselves. A lot of times, because of that luxury nutrient being something that the plants can really take up in potassium, it's also really important to know when we talk about the four R's, so the right placement, right time, right ratio, right rate. So let's talk about the right time now. With potassium, with potash, if you're putting it down early in the spring, the grasses are going to be actively growing because they're going to be breaking that dormancy. They're going to have all those reserves, and they're going to want to grow and start things off, right? And they're reaching for that reproduction. They're really going to take up a lot of that potassium. So if you spread manure, if you put a lot of potash down early on in the spring, you could be at higher risk for something called grass tetany, which is going to be magnesium deficiency in your forages, which will lead to problems with the livestock themselves. Again, it's all about the right placement, right timing, right rate for all these different nutrients. And, if it's really just, you can't be doing a lot of major amendments blindly. because things like this can happen, and they can be avoided with a simple soil test. We always talk about the base of good management is knowing what you have and understanding how to build on that. So grass tetany is something that we should probably be looking out for if you are spreading fertilizers early on, or just in general. A lot of the guys that I know, a lot of the livestock guys out there just know when early on in the springtime, it's a good idea to have high magnesium available as a supplement for their livestock for that reason.
Yeah, and another thing that gets commonly overlooked from the standpoint of grass tetany is those early spring flushes of growth really are high in the potassium, which downplays the availability of the magnesium. And it's simply just a factor of the growth cycle of the plant. And so delaying grazing as long as possible in those flush green fields is really important to keeping your animals healthy, and in the long run will save you a lot of money as far as field production as well. So we're going to not get off on that tangent. I promised Dan I wouldn't get off on tangents today. So we're going to stay focused on our grass tetany here.
All right, Karen. And another place you can actually look for grass tetany, and I know it's a little bit later. So in the soil test, you want that 2-to-1 ratio, but it's also important to look at the forage analysis. The forage analysis is another great tool because you can have grass tetany in the wintertime if your forages, so if your magnesium in your forage analysis now, if you have, so there should also be a balance between potassium to magnesium so that not to interfere with magnesium uptake. Potassium levels should be less than 3% typically in a forage test if you're kind of looking at it. And that's a forage test. I don't want people to get confused with, we're kind of jumping back and forth here. But on the forage test, you really want to make sure that you have less than 3% potassium, again, for that whole magnesium thing. Now, let's talk about potassium being a luxury nutrient that plants take up like crazy. They've done studies in corn, and, corn is a grass, right, Karen? It's a warm season grass.
Yep.
It's an annual, but it's a grass, and corn will behave similarly to a lot of the forages, especially in nutrients, growth rates, maybe not so much in terms of being an annual and a perennial, but we'll ignore that for now. But if you look at if you look at corn, if you have, let's say you have a field, this is a research conducted back in 2004 where they had 300 pounds per acre of potassium in their cornfields, right? So they planted their corn April 6th. And what they were doing now is measuring the depletion of potassium at a high concentration in corn, right? Luxury nutrient, it's going to absorb it like crazy. So they have found if you follow the trend from April 6th to about July, when the corn is all actively growing, you have a drop from about 300 to just below 200 pounds per acre. So over 100 pounds per acre of potassium was absorbed during that rapid growth curve. Mainly, not so much at the beginning, but we'll say from about a month out, because you got to remember that plants aren't growing that rapidly early on because they have to all the energy they have is in that seed, and they got to get that radicle out, start absorbing water, build the root system, build their source, which are the leaves producing all the sugars and things. Once a plant has a nice establishment, so a month later, from May 6th to July 2 to, we'll say July 20, that corn plant actually absorbed over 100 pounds per acre on average of potassium, which is really high. It is a luxury nutrient, and at this time, now I'm going to differentiate a little bit because forages are perennial grasses, right? They're already established. So we'll say that the rapid growth rate that corn has from May 6th to July is probably what we're seeing from late March to May in our forages, because they're going to be maybe even sooner, depending on the weather. Some people are saying, hey, yeah, we have some ugly days out, but that grass is growing pretty fast. And early in the spring, that grass is going to be absorbing copious amounts of potassium, which is really important to have that high magnesium supplemental mineral there available for their livestock, because grass tetany can occur. Now, the reason it occurs is that there is a pump in the rumen that will actually transport the magnesium and get it into the cow's blood. Okay. And that pump has a switch where it would pump out the potassium and be able to pump in the magnesium. So what happens now when that forage is really rich in potassium? Then that pump can't push out the potassium, so it can't absorb the magnesium. Just think of it in terms of concentration. You're going against the gradient, and you just can't push something out to get something in. Not because the magnesium is not there, but because there's not enough power to make that switch, which normally has to happen. It's a biochemistry thing, it's just the way it is. But having that high magnesium supplement now will allow the livestock to make sure that they're getting that adequate magnesium level, so that you can balance out those ratios and be okay. So remember, you want a ratio of 2-to-1 for magnesium and potassium. If you, let's say in certain cases, your soil test and your pH is good, your magnesium levels are awesome. Can you afford to put a little potash early in the spring? Probably. I would still do it with caution, and I would still use a high mag supplement. But just like liming, we always say there's a great time to do it, but there's never a bad time to do it. With potassium, there could be a bad time to do it if your ratios are off.
Now, the way to get around that is, if this is the time you have to spread, to put that on fields you're not going to be grazing right away. So if you have some paddocks broken up, which I recommend for rotational grazing purposes, then that could be a potential way that to break them up. So what we're looking at is, if you are using manure, and a lot of us do, I shouldn't say us, a lot of you do, you want to make sure that you recognize that manure is a great source for potassium, but it's not a great source for magnesium. And pastures that have a heavy load of manure, say it's where you've been winter feeding, or for a lot of our dairies that have to spread a lot, those areas are going to be concentrated sources of potassium. And that potassium, once it gets overloaded in the soil, can cause some problems. And so what we're trying to get you to do is to recognize up front that you need to be thinking ahead as to where you're going to ladle your potassium on.
Yeah, that's right. And just to compound things a little bit more, lactating older cows are more prone to grass tetany due to low calcium in the blood and inability to utilize magnesium in the bones. So, how many of you have cows that are calving right now? Those are the ones you got to watch. Those are also higher risk livestock for grass tetany. Now, what are you going to look for? What are you going to look for when you're out there in the field? Well, in mild symptoms of tetany, you're going to see decrease in milk production. You're going to see nervousness. That cow just isn't acting right. It's like it's all twittery. It's twitching. You might say, I haven't seen that cow graze at all. It'll stop grazing. And when you get up close, because, we should always check on your cows every day, you notice that they have twitchy skin. Those might be possible signs of tetany. Do you know what the potassium levels are in your field? Have you spread manure? Is that cow lactating? Just take these things into account. And if you suspect something, call your vet. And if you can catch it when it's mild, you might be all right. Severe cases of tetany, now, the cow will be lying down and they'll be trying to get up frequently, but they keep falling. They're going to be up and down, up and down, up and down. They're going to be bellowing continuously. They're going to be suffering. They're not going to like it. They're going to be staggered. They're going to look like they're drunk. Or Worst cases, they're going to collapse and they're going to be stiff. Again, did you spread manure in that field? Did you spread potash and that was it? Do you know what your magnesium levels are? Have you provided a high magnesium supplement? These are all great things to be able to mitigate or possibly avoid that problem altogether.
Yeah, and another question to ask yourself is, did you use calcium-based lime or dolomitic lime? And the dolomitic lime is what we recommend because it does have that additional magnesium content, which can help you rebalance it out in the fields. So another thing you want to look at is if you are feeding a magnesium mineral mixture, you need to have at least 8 to 12% magnesium to prevent tetany if the cattle are grazing that magnesium deficient forage and if they're at high risk. So it's a high risk animal on magnesium deficient forage, you're looking at an 8 to 12% magnesium mix for your minerals. And if you're looking for a more broad-based mineral mix, we have one that's been calculated for the soils of West Virginia. So right across the river, it's probably pretty similar. So you can just give me a holler at the extension office and I can get you that mineral mix. But to go back to tetany, Dan gave you the symptoms, but what do you do? Your like he was saying, the twitchy skin, the lying down, being staggered. You can give a magnesium sulfate subcutaneously. You should definitely remove the animal from a high-risk pasture. Even if you're just suspicious, taking them off of that high-risk pasture could save you.
And all the other animals, too.
Yeah, definitely. If you see it in one, then you could potentially be getting all of them. So move them to a different pasture. And the magnesium sulfate, the subcutaneous application, you're looking at 30 grams of magnesium sulfate daily. Now, I am not a veterinarian, and I am not going to, I hope that you recognize me as not a veterinarian, and you want to make sure that you do contact your veterinarian because they know your animals, at least they should know your animals, and they also know your farm, or they should know your farm. If they don't know you and your animals, you need to do a better job of contacting your veterinarian. They really should have a relationship on the farm and be able to tell you, oh yeah, I know that field, I know those animals, this is what I think you should give to them. So make sure you contact your veterinarian and get specific recommendations, because also a lot of these treatments are weight-based. So you want to make sure that you recognize the weight of the animal and how it's going to be affected by any treatments that you give.
Yeah, and just go a little bit more on preventative measures. Again, that high magnesium supplement is going to be a great way to possibly avoid that altogether. Don't over-apply potash. That also includes manure. Manures are great. They add organic matter. They build up the soil. They're not necessarily looking at management practices for manure handling. Don't apply the manure to the level of nitrogen that you need. That's just what happens when you do that is you oversaturate both phosphorus, which can cause other issues, but in this case, you'll be saturating with potassium, and you'll be putting yourself at a high risk of grass tetany possibly. Remember, especially if you got sandy soils, if you have sandy soils, chances are you're probably utilizing a lot of manures and organic matter to kind of keep things growing, keep things healthy, because your cation exchange capacity is not necessarily there, and you're probably going to be the one in the fields with low magnesium and low potassium. So be especially careful when you are applying that potassium early in the spring for these grass tetany issues. Now, we always talk about mixtures and, in terms of soil health and pasture resiliency, right? Legumes and forbs are high in magnesium. So maintaining a 30% legume ratio in your pastures. So the issue with potassium luxurious uptake is more so in the grasses. So if you have any kind of forage chicory, you got good legume growth in your pasture fields, I'm not going to say you're necessarily safe from tetany, but you are safer. So if grass tetany is going to be a bigger deal if you have very little in terms of legumes and forbs and high in grasses. Now, limit grazing on early spring pastures, especially if the cow was fed magnesium deficiency hay in the winter. So, let's say you've done let's say you buy hay, you got a forage analysis. Well, use it. Look at that ratio. Remember, if you see that the recommendation for the magnesium was low in that forage sample, well, be expecting that if you were to let that cow out, or the steer or whatever you have out in the field, say it's a stalker cow or livestock, then you could be setting yourself up for a real bad situation, because now the animal's already kind of deficient in the magnesium, and you're really going to exacerbate that problem. And again, observe the older lactating cows, because those are the ones you probably see the symptoms early. So have that magnesium supplement, again, 8 to 12%, and know which animals are going to be more prone to the grass tetany.
Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.